Hello, a very good morning, my dear students. This is your loving English teacher, Rohit sir, giving you Friday's lecture video class on the topic of the play. The name of the play is Mother's Day. It is the mother, like Mrs. Annie Pearson, who is disrespected or neglected by her family. But still, she is happy to be with her family. Whatever the result or the consequence of hers, that we would know after the class. In today's class, we have these like the characters of the play to be known, introduction of the play, and the last, the summary of the play with its climax, etc. As the number of COVID-19 cases is rising fast in several parts of the country, I appeal to the listeners to be vigilant and to get fully vaccinated and help others, including children between 15 to 18 years, get vaccinated. With the new Omicron variant of coronavirus causing concern, please continue to follow these three simple steps to stay safe. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 गज की दूरी for social distancing, focus on hands and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the class in detail. The characters what we have in the play are Mrs. Annie Pearson. She is the main character of the play or the heroine of the play. George Pearson, her husband. Doris Pearson, her daughter. And Cyril Pearson, her son. So, they are 4 members in the family. And the last character, Mrs. Fitzgerald, is not the member of her family. She is the next door person. It means the neighbor. So, in the play, we have 5 characters. Out of them, 4 are in a group of family, and the left or the last one is the neighbor of the family. So total we have 5 characters from the play. The action takes place in the living room of the Pearsons' house in a London suburb. Time, the present. This is the situation where the 2 ladies are discussing about. In the right hand side is Mrs. Annie Pearson, and in the left, Mrs. Fitzgerald. So, Mrs. Fitzgerald is a fortune teller. She tells about Mrs. Pearson's fortune that is very disrespected and neglected, and how it is disrespected or disregarded just because of her negligence done by her family members, her husband, her daughter, her son. They never give her respect because She always does their works before commitment, before saying, and they also behave like that. They never do respect because they never think that mom, their the second head member of the family, is also the part of the family. So that is the reason that Mrs. Pearson doesn't realize them that without her the family is nothing. Whenever they want, whatever they want, she fulfill, even she fulfills before that. So that's why she never realize about the problem, about the lack without her or without their mother. So that is the reason she is neglected or disrespected. So seeing this all thing or all the things, Mrs. Fitzgerald warned her not to be neglected and suggested her to make her position proper and strengthened, because without proper, without well position, she would be someday fully neglected. So before the day, she has to make her life well, and he has to settle her life properly in front of her family members. Like this, Mrs. Fitzgerald talked with her and discussed about the situation prevailing at the present. And we also see the scene holding the characters like Mrs. Annie Pearson and her neighbor Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now we have the introduction portion, Mother's Day introduction. The play, written by J.B. Presley, reveals how a mother's efforts are ignored by her family. It narrates how the family members who work 8 hour shifts a day look upon her, although she works for the whole day and all week. So it is not the matter of Mrs. Pearson, because every mother does their duty for her family all the days, like the week. They never try to get weekends because they think that the family is the first and foremost duty for them. So they never think about any leave, about any break. Just like the character Mrs. Pearson. After all she does for them, they take her for granted. They make her feel obligated to provide for them and do not even appreciate her efforts. It revolves around her, around how her friend Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is a fortune teller, helps her earn the place and respect she deserves as the woman of the house. So, the disrespect or neglect from the family of Mrs. Pearson is shown over here, and it is suggested by the neighbor Mrs. Fitzgerald that Mrs. Pearson has to receive her respect anyhow in the family, else she would be neglected and someday out of her family. So she fortune tells about the situation, what is about to come. Before the situation, Mrs. Pearson should have her own priority to the family. And this is said by the fortune teller as well as the neighbor, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Okay, so from the introduction portion, we come to know about the introductory level of the story. Now we could see the summary. The play begins with two friends having a candid conversation at Mrs. Pearson's house. Mrs. Fitzgerald is telling Mrs. Pearson's fortune and advises her on it. Mrs. Pearson goes about telling how her family members don't value her and don't appreciate whatever she deserves for them. So they were playing something, and in the mid the play, Mrs. Fitzgerald tells about her fortune as because of being fortune teller. She tells she wants her that she is neglected. She doesn't get any appreciate from her family. Though she is working all the day, all the week, but still she is under behind. She is under disrespect. She is under disregard. She is available for them 24 hours per day, and all they do is come in, throw orders around at her, and leave without even saying thank you. Mrs. Fitzgerald tells her to take her stand as the woman of the house, but Mrs. Pearson, being the sweet and innocent lady, doesn't want to bring her family any sort of discomfort. She continues to handle their tantrums because she doesn't know where to begin when it comes to making them disciplined. Mrs. Fitzgerald proposes a plan to switch their parties so that Mrs. Fitzgerald takes her place without her family knowing. So, after listening everything from Mrs. Fitzgerald, Mrs. Pearson doesn't get any effect because she's still like that. She still thinks about her family's betterment, but these things are not accepted by the person, by the lady, by the neighbor, Mrs. Fitzgerald. She told her not to do like that. She has to be confirmed, she has to be constant, she has to be strict about her family because without strictness, she would not get back her respect. Okay, so she suggested about a plan, and the plan is transforming souls, transforming spirits, exchanging spirits into one another. Like this, the family doesn't know about the plan. The family like this doesn't know about the plan, and they would complete the game stealthily. And Mrs. Pearson would get back her respect once again, forever. So, next, Mrs. Pearson is hesitant at first, but then Mrs. Fitzgerald convinces her for it. Mrs. Fitzgerald platforms her magic that she had learned from the East, and their personalities are exchanged or changed. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald is actually in Mrs. Pearson's body, and vice versa. Now, new Mrs. Pearson tells Mrs. Fitzgerald, to go to her house for the time being. At this moment in the play, Doris Pearson, daughter of Mrs. Pearson, enters the scene, asking for tea and ordering Mrs. Pearson to join, sorry, and ordering Mrs. Pearson to iron her yellow silk. So, after transforming the souls into opposite ones, now Mrs. Pearson is Mrs. Fitzgerald and Mrs. Fitzgerald is Mrs. Pearson. Okay, so don't make confused about the characters. Now the characters would play oppositely. Like Mrs. Pearson would tell the words of Mrs. Fitzgerald, and Mrs. Fitzgerald uses the words like Mrs. Pearson as they transferred their souls into one another. They exchanged their souls into one another. Before, Mrs. Pearson was not ready to do like that, but ultimately she was ready, and Fitzgerald tell Mrs. Fitzgerald warned her to go fast to Mrs. Fitzgerald's house. Whom she said? She said Mrs. Pearson, that Mrs. Fitzgerald's husband would come anytime. So before her husband's arrival, Mrs. Pearson should go fast and be present over there. So ultimately, the characters are playing their role oppositely. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald is in Mrs. Pearson's house with the soul of Mrs. Pearson, and Mrs. Pearson is in the house of Mrs. Fitzgerald with the soul of Mrs. Fitzgerald. Clear? Okay. Then, after what happened, now in the scene, Doris Pearson, the daughter of Mrs. Pearson, entered. She asked for the tea and for iron her yellow silk. But she didn't get the answer positively what she expected. She didn't get the answer yes. She got the answer no. When Mrs. Pearson said no, she cannot do anymore because she was very busy all the day, and it is not easy to her what to iron her silk dress. And that time Miss Doris Pearson was getting very angry and shocked to see the unique behavior of her mother. Clear? So what happened? She gets shocked at the sight of her mother smoking, and from there, the argument begins where Mrs. Pearson insults Charlie Spence, the guy she is about to go out with. Doris leaves crying, and Cyril, her brother, enters asking for tea and something to eat. He too is amazed at having come home to see that there is nothing to eat and no tea to drink. Upon asking if anything is wrong, Mrs. Pearson tells him that she had never felt better. Cyril gets annoyed and Doris joins him, where they are told that Mrs. Pearson might even take the weekend off. So when she gets the answer negative, meanwhile, her brother, it means Mrs. Pearson's son, Cyril, came back to home. Even Cyril received the same behavior like the behavior received by his sister. And Cyril was very shocked that their mother was smoking and behaving differently, what was not expected. And ultimately, Mrs. Pearson said them what? Now, Mrs. Pearson needed weekend off. Every Saturday, Sunday, she would not do any work as these are weekends, and like them, she also needed the leaves as weekends. Next, George Pearson enters the scene, shocked to see his wife day drinking. He announces that he has some special match at the club and that he won't be requiring any tea this afternoon. On being told there is no tea, he gets annoyed again. Mrs. Pearson mocks him for getting annoyed at not getting something he didn't actually want. She tells him about the names they call him at the club. She fathers she further taunts him that this would not have happened had he stayed at home once in a while. So, after the scene, George Pearson enters the scene. Okay, George Pearson, who is George Pearson? George Pearson is the husband of Mrs. Pearson. He enters the scene and told her that he would not take any tea and the dinner for the day because he was going to the club where he would have his tea as well as the dinner. Listening these all things, Mrs. Pearson commented and exposed the truth that in the club, whoever is there, they never respect George. They do mimicry, even they make some funny names to him. So it is useless to go to the club. Better to be in the house only. Why? Because spending with family members is better than to be in the club where he doesn't, who? George doesn't. George doesn't get any respect from there. So listening these all things, listening these all things, he is very uh, angry and ready to prove that no, it was not like that. But ultimately, it was proved that really he was used over there with funny names, and they never liked the man. Who is the man? George, Mrs. Pearson's husband. Clear? So what happened then after that? After a while, Mrs. Fitzgerald enters. She interferes in their family matters. George gets annoyed when Mrs. Fitzgerald calls him by his name, but just like it had been happening all day, Mrs. Pearson barges in to bring George on track. Doris enters the scene and she too is not very pleasant to Mrs. Fitzgerald. Mrs. Pearson brings her on track too. So ultimately, when the discussion was going on with the family members, meanwhile, Mrs. Fitzgerald, actually, she is not Mrs. Fitzgerald. The body is of Mrs. Fitzgerald, but the soul is of Mrs. Pearson. So she entered the scene and disturbed them, and she ensured them that everything would be fine. There's no reason of being panicked. Just she needed a time to talk something else with Mrs. Pearson. Who said? Mrs. Fitzgerald said to the family members of Mrs. Pearson that she would talk to Mrs. Pearson secretly about something. And what happened after that? At this point, Mrs. Pearson loses her cool and asks the family members to excuse the two friends for a moment. She promises them that she knows how to make the situation better. Mrs. Fitzgerald asks Mrs. Pearson to switch their bodies, and while Mrs. Fitzgerald resists at first, but later she agrees to do it. They repeat the process they did in the first place. The real Mrs. Fitzgerald now explains Mrs. Pearson how important it is for her to be a bit dominating once in a family or in a while to establish her control and respect. So, when she got the permission from the family members of Mrs. Pearson, she talked to Mrs. Fitzgerald. She talked about the previous form, what they have actually, and Mrs. Fitzgerald took promise from her that anyhow she would get back her respect in the family, and giving the promise to Mrs. Fitzgerald, they are come back again in their previous form or the former forms, and they dealt the situation better to be known how to do. The real Mrs. Fitzgerald now explains Mrs. Pearson how important it is for her to be a bit dominating once in a while to establish her control and respect. The family enters and Mrs. Pearson suggests that they play rummy and the kids make supper. Everyone instantly agrees and they are a bit revealed too. Mrs. Fitzgerald exists and the play ends. So, what happened? So, after getting everything from the secret discussion between them, the family found Mrs. Pearson like before, and they received that Mrs. Pearson behaved like before, and they were very happy finding Mrs. Pearson and following the instruction whatever done by Mrs. Pearson. Mrs. Pearson asked for being all the time with the family, with her, except their duties or important works, and they were agreed to do like that. And for the day, they were playing rummy game, and the kids were making supper. Everyone was agreed to do what is instructed by Mrs. Pearson, and they got relieved that ultimately Mrs. Pearson was ready and followed everything like their demands. Oppositely, Mrs. Fitzgerald exists the scene and the curtains fall down and the play is ended over here. So like this we come to know about the end or the result or the consequence also. So it was like happy ending. It was the end of the disrespect or ignorance or negations of Mrs. Pearson's family members for her, and the mother is respected in the family again. So that's why the story is called or named as Mother's Day. And that day onwards, Mrs. Pearson, being a mother, gets her respect as well as honor for from her family. So like this, she gets her respect and honor from her family. Then the students, we have this much only for today's class. Hope you would get the play well and there would be no issue regarding the class. Until then, keep practicing and keep learning. Thank you.